Welcome to our deep dive into a really, frankly, shocking situation.
Yeah.
We're going to examine this case where this citizen is battling not one, not two, but three
Wow.
powerful government institutions for transparency and accountability.
That's a lot.
It's a story full of contradictions in official documents
Huh.
and has a real David versus Goliath vibe.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it is. And it'll really leave you wondering about the state of our systems.
Well, what I find really unsettling about this case is it's not just, differing interpretations or
Yeah.
some kind of bureaucratic bungling.
Right, right.
You get the sense that these institutions know the information they've published is false,
Wow.
and yet they're unwilling to correct it.
Wow.
That's a level of institutional decay that should concern every single person who believes in good governance.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
So this whole saga revolves around Justin Riddle.
Okay.
He's a citizen who feels wronged by the Nebraska Attorney General's office.
Mm-hmm.
And it all traces back to an incident at an Omaha Public Schools board meeting back in 2021,
Okay.
where his mother, Cheryl Adamson, a retired teacher, was stopped from speaking during public comments.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is where the story takes this crazy twist.
Okay.
So the initial complaint states that Cheryl was interrupted for trying to play an audio recording.
Okay.
However, the Attorney General's report later claims that she was silenced because she refused to give her address.
So already we're seeing some discrepancies.
Right, and,
Yeah.
and the report actually contradicts itself on this point, which raises really serious questions about the investigation's integrity
Yeah, definitely.
and the motivation behind silencing Adamson in the first place.
Absolutely. And the thing that gets me is they couldn't even keep their story straight.
I know it's wild.
And then on top of that,
It gets worse.
Justin and his mother weren't even told about the investigation until 2 years later.
Oh my God.
And they just happened to come across the report accidentally.
Can you imagine?
Just imagine finding out that you're the subject of an official investigation years after the fact.
Right.
And then you read the report.
It is full of lies.
And it's full of demonstrably false claims.
That's a complete breach of due process.
Absolutely.
They were denied a chance to even give their side of the story during the investigation, which further erodes the credibility of the findings.
100%.
So did Justin try to fix these issues with the authorities?
He did, and that's when the stonewalling began.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, he contacted both the Attorney General's office and the Ombudsman's office, trying to get some clarification and some correction of the report.
Makes sense.
But all of his emails and his written communication were basically ignored.
Wow.
And whenever he tried to go there in person, he was met with just bureaucratic roadblocks.
So he's hitting dead ends everywhere.
Dead ends everywhere.
It's like that feeling of powerlessness against a system that just feels rigged.
Totally. And this lack of responsiveness from both of these agencies
Right.
really raises concerns about transparency and accountability.
Absolutely.
When these government bodies just refuse to engage with legitimate complaints from citizens, it makes people not want to speak up.
It really does.
It really chills free speech and the right to petition the government for redress.
It's like they're saying, we made our decision and we don't care what you have to say.
That's exactly the message that they're sending, and it really undermines public trust in the entire system.
Of course.
It suggests that they're much more concerned with protecting themselves
Right.
than they are with actually upholding justice and fairness.
So how did Justin respond to being stonewalled?
Well, he became more and more assertive
Sure.
in trying to get some answers,
Yeah.
which unfortunately just made the conflict worse.
Okay.
Yeah, he was met with physical barriers at the Attorney General's office,
Really?
threatened with arrest,
Wow.
and then ultimately they slapped him with a trespass notice, banning him from the building.
Wait, so they barred him from the building? That seems incredibly harsh,
It is.
especially considering he's trying to address what he believes are false statements published by that very office.
It is. It raises really serious concerns about their commitment to free speech
Right.
and the right to petition the government.
Right.
Justin was basically silenced and intimidated just for speaking out against what he perceived as wrongdoing.
This is where his story takes on that whole David versus Goliath dimension.
Totally.
Right? He's feeling powerless against these massive institutions.
Yeah.
And so he turns to public platforms like YouTube to document his experiences and apply pressure to these institutions.
And that's a really key turning point in this story.
Absolutely.
By going public, Justin was able to circumvent those traditional channels that had failed him.
Totally.
And he reached a wider audience with his story.
Absolutely. He used social media to challenge the official narrative and force these institutions to acknowledge his claims.
Exactly. And it's a fascinating example of how citizens can leverage digital platforms
Absolutely.
to hold these powerful entities accountable.
Especially when traditional avenues for seeking justice have been exhausted.
Exact.
So we have a citizen who feels that he's been wronged by the government. He's being ignored by the very institutions that are meant to serve him.
Right.
And ultimately silenced for daring to speak out.
Yeah.
It's a disturbing situation that raises serious questions about the health of our democratic systems.
And it doesn't stop there. This conflict escalated to the point where Justin actually filed a lawsuit
Oh, wow.
against Omaha Public Schools, the Attorney General's office, and the Ombudsman's office.
He's taking them all to court.
He is.
So what are the main things he's saying in this lawsuit?
Well, he's alleging several serious violations, including the violation of his First and 14th Amendment rights to petition, speech, and due process.
Wow.
He's also claiming a conspiracy to interfere with his civil rights and a violation of the Nebraska Public Records Act.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Let's break it down for our listeners. What exactly is he alleging in each of these claims?
So his claim of the First and 14th Amendment violations stems from the fact that his mother was silenced at the school board meeting.
Okay.
And then that trespass notice that he got,
Wait.
which he argues was basically retaliation for his protected speech.
Right.
He's saying that these actions were basically a way to stop him from exercising his First Amendment right to petition the government, and also a violation of his due process rights under the 14th Amendment.
So he's arguing that they punished him for exercising his constitutional rights.
Exactly.
What about the conspiracy claim?
So he's alleging that there was a coordinated effort between the Attorney General's office, the Ombudsman's office, and Omaha Public Schools to silence him and cover up their own misconduct.
That's a serious accusation. What evidence does he have to back that up?
Well, he's pointing to those contradictory statements we talked about earlier in the Attorney General's report about his mother being silenced and also the lack of response to his requests for information, and the fact that the various agencies all seem to be deflecting responsibility and pointing fingers at each other rather than actually addressing his concerns directly.
It sounds like he's saying their collective actions, or inaction rather, suggests a deliberate attempt to bury the truth and protect themselves.
Exactly. He's alleging that their behavior goes way beyond simple bureaucratic inefficiency.
Right?
And indicates a more calculated and coordinated effort to silence any dissent and avoid being held accountable.
And finally, what about the violation of the Nebraska Public Records Act? What does that involve?
So this claim focuses on the Attorney General's office's refusal to release the report and all the related records to Justin.
Even though he asked for them.
Even though he asked for them repeatedly, he argues that this refusal violates the Nebraska Public Records Act, which guarantees citizens the right to access public records.
So he's fighting for transparency and access to information that he believes belongs to the public. This case is quickly becoming this multifaceted legal battle with potentially really significant implications for government accountability and citizen rights in Nebraska.
It really is, and this case will undoubtedly have a ripple effect not just within Nebraska, but potentially across the nation.
Yeah.
It raises fundamental questions about the power dynamic between citizens and these government institutions.
Absolutely.
And to what lengths those institutions might go to protect themselves from scrutiny.
It's a story that's far from over, and we're going to continue our deep dive into this case in part 2 of this series, where we'll examine the evidence Justin has presented.
Yes.
Explore the legal arguments in greater depth, and consider the potential outcomes of this lawsuit and its broader implications for government transparency and accountability in the digital age.
Can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into the case of Justin Riddle and his battle against a system that really seems determined to silence him.
Yeah, in the last part, we laid out the foundation of this case, the initial incident, the contradictions in the Attorney General's report, and the stonewalling that Justin faced when he just tried to get answers.
Right.
Now I want to kind of dig a little deeper into his decision to go public with this story.
Okay.
What do you think about this strategy of using YouTube and social media to just bring attention to this whole situation?
Yeah, I think it's a tactic we're seeing more and more.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to a growing frustration
Sure.
with the traditional ways of addressing grievances against government agencies.
Right.
When people feel like they're not being heard through those official channels,
Yeah.
they're going to turn to platforms where they can control the narrative and reach a bigger audience.
It's almost like a modern-day town square,
Exactly.
where citizens can voice their concerns and hold those in power accountable.
Precisely. And in Dustin's case, it seems like it's been pretty effective at amplifying his voice and putting pressure on these institutions involved.
Yeah.
They can't just ignore him now.
Right. Or sweep these claims under the rug.
But going public like that, it also has risks.
Sure.
It can be seen as confrontational.
Right.
And maybe even make those institutions more defensive.
Yeah.
Do you think this strategy could backfire?
There's always a risk that going public could escalate things.
Sure.
But it can also be a really powerful tool to kind of level the playing field.
Right.
By shining that public spotlight on this situation.
Yeah.
Justin's forcing those institutions to respond and justify their actions.
It's a high-stakes gamble.
It is.
But one that might be necessary when you've tried everything else.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Justin's not just doing this for himself.
Right.
He's fighting for a principle.
Right.
The principle that government institutions need to be transparent and they need to be accountable to the people they serve.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to the lawsuit itself.
Yeah.
Justin is claiming a bunch of legal violations.
He is.
And I have to say, some of these legal terms can be a little bit confusing.
Oh, yeah? Let's start with the defamation claim.
Okay.
Can you break down what that means in just normal terms?
So basically, defamation is when somebody makes a false statement about you that hurts your reputation.
Okay.
In this case, Justin is arguing that the Attorney General's report has false information about him.
Okay.
Specifically about how he behaved at that school board meeting.
Okay.
And that false information is hurting his reputation.
So he's saying they lied about him in an official government document.
That's essentially what he's claiming.
Wow.
And if he can prove that the information in that report is false,
right,
and that it actually harmed his reputation, he could win a defamation case.
Okay, so that brings us to another kind of complex legal idea, prior restraint.
Right.
Justin's arguing that that trespass notice that's barring him from the Attorney General's office violates his First Amendment rights. Can you explain what prior restraint means, like in this context?
Yeah, so prior restraint is a legal term. That means that the government is taking action to prevent speech or publication before it happens.
Okay.
So in this case, Justin is saying that trespass notice is a form of prior restraint.
Yeah.
Because it's stopping him from going to the Attorney General's office to exercise his First Amendment right to petition the government for redress of grievances.
So they're silencing him before he can even say anything.
That's what he's arguing.
Okay.
And if the court decides that that trespass notice was given to him as retaliation for his protected speech,
Yeah.
they could overturn it.
It seems like a pretty clear violation of his First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
What about his claim that they violated his 14th Amendment right to due process?
Okay, so due process basically means that you have the right to fair treatment from the government.
Okay.
This includes the right to be told about any charges against you,
Right.
the right to present your side of the story,
Sure.
and the right to have an impartial decision maker.
Which he was denied in this case.
Exactly. Remember, he and his mother didn't even know about the investigation for years,
Yeah.
and they were never given a chance to respond to those accusations.
That's a pretty big breach of due process.
It is.
Okay, let's talk about that conspiracy claim.
Okay.
That's a pretty strong accusation.
Yeah.
What would Justin have to prove to convince the court that there was a conspiracy to silence him and cover up this misconduct?
Proving a conspiracy is tough.
Yeah.
Justin would need to show that there was an agreement
Okay.
between at least two people
Right.
to do something illegal,
Okay.
and that they actually took steps to carry out that agreement.
So what kind of evidence could he use to back that up?
Well, he could point to things like communication records between those officials,
Okay.
inconsistencies in their statements,
Sure.
and just an overall pattern of behavior that suggests they were coordinating to hide information or block his attempts to get justice.
So it sounds like he's relying on circumstantial evidence.
That's right. And it's important to note that in civil cases, the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence,
Okay.
meaning it's more likely than not that those things happened.
Okay.
It's a lower standard than in criminal cases where you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
So he doesn't have to definitively prove there was a conspiracy, just that it's more likely than not.
Exactly.
Okay. What about his claim about the Nebraska Public Records Act? What does that guarantee, and how does he say it was violated?
The Nebraska Public Records Act gives citizens the right to access public records.
Okay.
With a few exceptions,
Great.
like information that could put an ongoing investigation at risk
Sure.
or violate someone's privacy.
Okay, so he's entitled to see those records.
In most cases, yes, but there are exceptions.
Right.
And the government agency has to prove that the records fall under one of those exceptions.
And he's saying they haven't done that?
That's his claim. He's saying they've refused to release the report and all the related records without a good reason. And that goes against his rights under the Nebraska Public Records Act.
This is a complicated case with a lot of moving parts.
It is.
And it seems like all of these legal claims are intertwined.
They are.
So what do you think are some possible outcomes of this whole lawsuit?
Well, it's hard to say for sure how the court will decide.
Sure.
But there are a couple of possibilities.
Okay.
The best case scenario for Justin would be if the court rules in his favor on all or some of his claims.
Okay.
They could order the Attorney General's office to take back the report, issue a public apology, and maybe even pay damages for hurting his reputation.
Okay.
They could also order that trespass notice to be canceled and make them hand over the records he asked for.
That would be a pretty big win for Justin.
It would be.
But what about the opposite? What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario for Justin would be the court dismissing all of his claims.
Okay.
This could mean that they accept the Attorney General's report as the final word.
Right.
Maybe he'll still be banned from the Attorney General's office.
Wow.
And he might even have to pay legal fees.
That would be a huge setback.
It would be. But even if that happened, his efforts haven't been completely wasted.
Right.
He's brought these important issues into the public eye.
Absolutely.
He's started a discussion about government accountability and transparency.
Right.
And he might even inspire others to stand up for their rights.
So even if he loses, he could still create some positive change.
Exactly. And that's why this case is so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just about what happened to Justin Riddle.
Yeah.
It's about how much power citizens have to hold their institutions accountable.
Okay, well, listeners, I hope you're seeing how complicated this case is.
Yeah.
And what's at stake here.
Absolutely.
We've talked about a lot today, but there's still more to unpack.
Definitely.
In the last part of our deep dive, we'll look at the evidence that Justin has presented.
Okay.
Think about what kind of precedents this case could set.
Right.
And really dig into those broader implications for government transparency and accountability in our digital world.
It's going to be good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Justin Riddle's fight for transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
We've, explored the roots of this conflict,
Yay.
the legal claims that are at play, his use of social media to get his voice out there.
Yeah.
In this final part, I want to take a look at the evidence he's presented
Okay.
and think about what this case could mean for the future.
That seems good.
So one of the most interesting things that Justin has is the video recording of the school board meeting where his mother was silenced.
Oh, yeah.
And this footage completely contradicts what the Attorney General said about why she was removed.
Really?
Yeah, they said she refused to give her address.
Right. Right.
But the video clearly shows her trying to play an audio recording, being stopped, and then escorted out.
So they're lying.
It really seems that way.
Yeah.
And it seems like pretty damning evidence.
Yeah.
It suggested the Attorney General's report got it wrong.
Wow.
And Justin says they're refusing to admit their mistake or correct the record.
So what are they saying?
It's not just about this one mistake.
Okay.
It's about a pattern of not being upfront and unwillingness to admit when they're wrong,
Right.
which makes you wonder about some deeper problems within these institutions.
It's like they just care about looking good and keeping their power?
Yeah, more than finding the truth and ensuring justice.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah. And the evidence that Justin has, especially those recordings,
Yeah.
really backs up that story.
It does. Okay, so besides those recordings,
Yeah.
what else does Justin have to support his claims about the stonewalling, the conspiracy, and that violation of public records laws?
Well, he's kept detailed records of every interaction he's had with the Attorney General's office, the Ombudsman's office, Omaha Public Schools.
Wow, he's thorough.
Yeah. Emails, letters, phone records, even recordings of when he went to visit in person.
Smart.
So he's got this mountain of evidence showing unanswered messages.
Wow.
Responses that just brush him off.
Yeah.
Actions that seem like they're meant to stop him from getting information and seeking justice.
It sounds like he's really making a case for a pattern of behavior
Right.
that goes beyond just simple incompetence.
Exactly. And you can't ignore all that documentation.
You can't.
It paints a picture of institutions that are not only not responding,
Yeah.
but maybe actively trying to silence dissent and avoid being held accountable.
This case really gets at the heart of what it means to live in a democracy.
I agree.
Like, if people can't trust their government to be honest, transparent, and accountable,
Right.
what does that say about our institutions?
Big questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what could happen with this lawsuit.
Okay.
What kind of impact could it have if Justin wins?
Well, if the court sides with Justin, it could have a huge impact on government transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
Not just in Nebraska, but across the whole country.
Really?
It could mean stronger protections for whistleblowers and people who challenge official narratives.
That's huge.
It could also force government institutions to respond to public records requests and be more careful about using their power to silence critics.
This could be a case that really changes things.
A landmark case.
Yeah, giving people more power to hold their government accountable.
Exactly.
And sending a message that officials can't just ignore or silence people who question them.
Yeah, it might even encourage others who've had similar experiences to come forward.
And demand justice.
Exactly.
But even if he doesn't win,
right.
hasn't he already accomplished something just by bringing this issue to everyone's attention?
Definitely, no matter what the court decides. Justin has raised awareness about these problems. He's challenged powerful institutions.
He has.
And he's inspired others to demand more transparency and accountability from their government.
Absolutely.
His story really shows how much power one person can have.
Yeah.
To make a difference even when things seem impossible.
Yeah, that's a powerful message. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this complex and disturbing case. We explored how it started the legal issues, the evidence, and what it could mean for the future of government transparency and accountability.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
And this story is far from over. We'll keep following it and see what happens.
Please do.
But in the meantime, we encourage you to learn more about it yourself.
Yeah.
We've got some resources in our show notes.
Great.
And most importantly, stay engaged, ask questions, and hold those in power accountable because the health of our democracy really depends on it.
I completely agree.